Analyze any of the triads that you know what they are, like the 1, 6, whatever. And when you get to the point where the triad doesn't make any sense, you write chromatic movement. And you do a little wavy line under it until you get to a triad that makes sense. Now, the hard part is, of course, deciding that it's chromatic movement, because you'll sit there for quite a while going, well, what if I'm wrong? What if there's a chord there and I'm just not understanding what it is? The hints are that you should see in some parts chromatic movement. And they might be in the middle. They could be in an alto or a tenor or the bass. But if you start to see this chromatic movement, that's a big hint. Now you do want to look at each of the chords, and if you run across one that makes sense in the key, the way this one did. So in this particular one, to analyze it, you put a first measure, tonic 6. Second measure, if you wanted to do the supertonic half diminished, that's okay, that makes sense in this key. But when you got to the 5 of flat 5, 5, 7 of flat 5, at that point you'd write chromatic movement, and you do a squiggly line up to any chord, well, the 5, 7 of 4 makes sense. Now, the most important thing, everybody look at the top of the left hand, because this is the chromatic movement. So the left hand is going that one line, that alto line, which happens to be the top of the bass note, that's chromatic. If you follow the middle line of the left, whole step, half step, half step, half step. So he's trying to use as much chromatic as he can. He had a whole step. And then the bass. Chromatic. So what's happening, if you look at the parts, they're not all moving chromatically at the same time. That's why I tend to refer to it as melting harmony, but you won't find that in a textbook. Because you've got your three, your bass and your tenor and your alto, and one will move down a half step, the others stay the same. Then another moves down a half step, the others stay, and then another moves, and eventually it's kind of slowly morphed into a new chord. So this is what you have to look for, is somewhere along the line, chromatic movement, and that's the hint. And it will be somebody like Chopin or Wagner or Liszt or late Romantic who'll do this.
In measure 4, where that B flat comes in, that something about that when you were playing it really stood out to where I circled it. It made me happy. I couldn't figure out that E,
well,
G, B flat.
there's a real chord there, C sharp, E, G, B flat. That's a 7 diminished 7. Now it would be of a subtonic because we're in E minor, but I know what you mean though. Why do you pick B flat? In E minor, B flat doesn't make any sense, yet it works perfectly there. So somehow our brains, even though B flat is not a note you would use in E minor, the fact that it went by half step, we were almost by that point predicting a half step movement. He gave us one we weren't expecting, and we were overjoyed to hear it. It's hard to explain exactly how the brain functions.
Couldn't that also work in the key of D minor though? Because he has the C sharp.
It would be a 7 diminished 7 of D minor.
Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Matthews, are you saying that the chromaticism, is it continuous? Like it would go in the soprano and then the next note immediately go to the alto, or are there places where
No, I'm saying it wouldn't happen at the same time. So
no, but I mean that where one leaves off, does another one pick up, or are there places where you
it could overlap. You don't really know. This is really difficult to write. So there's a lot of leeway. For example, the idea that it's either chromatic or a whole step. So a couple of them are whole steps because you just can't ever quite get everything moving by half step. So 2 of them can move at the same time, or just one, and it's rather good. Now, when I was taking this class, the teacher said that this was really difficult and you should try it. You should try to write something that morphs in something. Of course I did. So I took this. Listen to this. This is what I came up with. It's tonic triad in the key of C. C, E, G. I take the lowest note down a half step. What chord is that? Now it's B, E, G, E minor. So that's just a medium, right? Okay, now I take the top note of G down a half step to F sharp. And then the middle note down a half step to D sharp. And I'm on a major triad. Now look what I did. So I started with the C, E, G. And then I went to B. So I took the bottom note down a half step. And then the next chord I took the top note down a half step, but I kept this middle. And that gave the sound of a suspension, that the E was suspended. And then when the E resolved down to a D sharp, it gave the sound of a suspension resolving to a major triad. But this triad's a half step lower.
Yeah.
So then I said to make it a musical piece, I added just some. There I am on B, and then I did it again. Now I'm on B flat. So I'm basically just going down a half step at a time. And now I'm on an A. So if I just play these triads, that wouldn't make a good composition at all. But this was what I came up with, and it was amazing. I could just keep going down half step, and it sounded like it was turning into a piece of music as long as I would change that little melody thing I was doing with the bass, change it around. As soon as you got to something that sounded like the suspension, whenever it resolved, everybody always went, oh, resolution of suspension. And you hardly noticed that you ended up a half step lower than you were before.
To me, it felt like Moonlight Sonata.
Well, it had a triplet going on, and Moonlight Sonata has a lot of suspensions. But, I mean, that's not a logical movement to go down a half step and always end on a major triad, the half steps. But just to say, this is the thinking here, was chromatic movement. And notice, as I said, the movement's happening at different times. Here it's in the lowest voice, then it happens in the upper voice, then it happens in the middle voice. So, other than that, the other voices are being held. So it just overlaps.
What would it sound like if you started on a minor triad?
This could be the May progression. One goes down a whole step and another half step or something. You might come up with something entirely different. But this is an amazing piece. It's just a short prelude. It's not what you would consider a deep piece of music that would take a long time to analyze, but what happened was it did take a long time to analyze. When it came out and the musicians are trying to decide why it sounded so good, they were kind of baffled by it. And so even Chopin and the composers themselves had to kind of step back and say, I know it sounds good, I like